So if you guys remember a little while back, I made my Metallica collection video, in which I said that Metallica was my favorite band, and I listed some of my opinions on the album as I showed you all the albums I had. And Metallica is still my favorite band, but some of my opinions have changed on those albums. And I feel like I've matured enough to the point where I can kind of say what my real feelings about these albums are. And today I'm just going to be ranking all the Metallica studio albums. Keep in mind, I do love every single one of these albums. Some more than others, but I don't hate a single one of them. I see something in each one of them. Even the worst ones, I see something in them. And today I'm going to be going in deep detail on why I think these albums rank the way they do, and just so on and so forth. But yeah, that being said, let's get started. And I think the least good album out of their whole discography is probably Saint Anger. The production quality on this thing was a monster. It was not good. And the snare drum is just what throws everything off. There's overabundance of snare drum. It fills up the whole album to the point where there's no redeeming qualities about it. There's not a single real song on here that isn't completely destroyed, just mostly because of that reason. Some of these songs just weren't sound in the first place, and even the producers said that they couldn't really get good performance out of them. But, that being said, I still do appreciate some of the things about this album. I know what the band was going through at the time. James was going through rehab. The band didn't even know if they were going to be a band anymore. They didn't have a bassist because Jason left. There was just so much going on during this that it's a miracle that this even came out at all, or that the band's even still around today. And the Some Kind of Monster really documents that in great detail, I think. So I think you should definitely watch that movie. But, yeah, there's a couple songs on here that I think might have been able to be saved if it weren't for the snare drum. Like Saint Anger's, the song itself is not too bad, but the snare drum, man, it kills everything. And Dirty Window's alright, but really, and the Unnamed Feeling's pretty good. There's a couple songs on here that I do find somehow getting in my head some time of the day whenever I'm working or something. It just pops up. Some of them, like I said, some of them aren't half bad, but it's just, there's a lot of things going against this album. But that being said, I still do enjoy this album, and I listen to it over some albums. Not any that are coming to mind, but there's some albums that I would not really care to listen to. But I'll listen to this because it's still Metallica, still my favorite band. Can't not like it, at least a little bit. And moving on, the second worst, but at the same time not that bad album is Death Magnetic. This has all the right ingredients, and it's got two songs that I really do enjoy and listen to multiple times throughout my day. That being The Unforgiven 3 and The Day That Never Comes. I love those songs. But really, they just, after Metallica had their 90s period where they just strayed away from metal completely, and Saint Anger, which was, we just talked about it, Death Magnetic was their first attempt to go back to their metal roots, and it has the right ingredients. It's just not, there's nothing extra to push it. It has the basic Metallica formula, but it doesn't have anything really driving it to go forward and be genre breaking like it was before. The songs in here they're just kind of bland. They just feel like they're going through the motions. There's no real wow factor to it. But it's just, a lot of the songs are boring. I don't really remember any of them except for The Unforgiven 3 and The Day That Never Comes. And I almost considered putting this album below Saint Anger because even though Saint Anger is by all means a bad album, I would much prefer a bad album as opposed to a boring album, because a bad album, you remember most of the things about it, mostly the bad stuff, but with a boring album, there's nothing really to say about it. And that's just what holds Death Magnetic back for me. And I don't know, I just think it could have been better, but overall, it's not a bad album. I'll still listen to it. But out of all my Metallica albums, it's probably the one I've listened to the least. Coming up next is An album that I've had mixed opinions on for the past few years, but I think I've finally come up with a good place to put it. And that being Reload. This is the last studio album with Jason Newsted. He's one of my heroes. He's a great bassist. All that good stuff. But Reload. Fuel's a good one. Memory Remains is pretty catchy. Unforgiven 2 is amazing. Where the Wild Things Are. But really just, I don't know. There's just something about, like, half the songs are good. Other half isn't that good. I just think that it just feels like leftover scraps from Reload. And I know there were supposed to be 2 albums at one point, but it's just, it feels like leftovers. And for that, I just can't really put it any higher or any lower than it is. I like some of the songs on here. I like what they're going for, but it just, overall, it's not really what I'd consider good in my opinion. But still listen to it all the time. And the next one in the whole little lineup would have to probably be... this one's a tough one. I have a hard time for these next few ones, but I'd say the next one would probably be Load. I do like this album. This is, out of all the rankings, I think this is where Metallica starts getting good again. And this was like their first real attempt to stray away from what they've been doing at this point. Black Album was kind of an attempt, but really it was just what they've been doing, but more mainstream. This was the first real departure. They cut their hair, got eyeliner, fur coats, and just, they really changed their whole lineup and their songwriting, but I think there are a lot of gems on this album. And I think this album, out of all the Metallica albums, like I said in my Metallica collection video, I think this is the most underrated Metallica album. It's really got some good songs on it. The House That Jack Built Until It Sleeps, King Nothing, Hero of the Day, Bleeding Me. It's just Mama Said, Ronnie, Outlaw Torn. Outlaw Torn's one of their best songs they ever done, and people just don't remember it because it's on Load. But I really think it's got some great songs in it, a whole lot more than Load. It's more than half good. And I like the album cover, I like the design, I just really like it. And the band, after they went on their ginormous Black Album tour, they had no idea what to do. They weren't used to going back to doing studios because the Black Album tour lasted a super long time. So I just think this album really needs more credit than it's due, or more credits than it gets, because I think they really tried to put their heart and soul into this for the time, and I just really think that this album is good. I do not think it's the best, obviously, but I do appreciate it, and I do really enjoy it. And I listen to this album more than others. This is probably one of the top 4 albums that I listen to from them. I really think it's good. But I know a lot of people aren't really going to agree with me on that, but oh well, what are you going to do? Next one. Their most recent album as of this video, Hardwired to Self-Destruct. I love this album so much. After this point, you're going to see nothing but good albums. Good albums that I love almost every single song on. This is the only album out of the next few rankings that I don't love every single song. The first disc is amazing. They tried to go back to their metal roots, and they succeeded exponentially, because it was a continuation of Death Magnetic, really, and they found that push, that extra thing that makes the song innovative and just don't feel like repeats of the past. Hardwired to Self-Destruct, Atlas Rise, Moth Into the Flame, Dream No More, Halo on Fire, all great all great songs. The second part, the second CD is just, it's not as good, but the closing track, Spit Out the Bone, is one of the best Metallica songs in years, and just, I really enjoy this album, and I really hope that they keep up with this kind of quality and just keep improving, so maybe they could go back. They'll definitely never ever go back to their full metal 80s days, but I think they could at least strive to go back to the Black Album days when they quite literally ruled the world. Next album would have to be And Justice for All. This was their last album of the 80s, and I like it. A lot of the songs are just headbanging goodness. They get you pumped up. Blackened, and Justice for All, Eye of the Beholder, One, Shortest Straw, Frayed Ends of Insanity, To Live Is to Die, Dyer's Eve. Each of those songs is great in their own right, but the bass, we gotta talk about the bass. The bass, Lars wanted his drums to sound a certain way, and it caused the bass to be barely audible. And I think it just holds this album back from being a great one. This was Jason's first album, and they didn't give him a chance to show off his capabilities, and I think that was a huge step back. And it was the first album after Cliff died, so they were kind of getting their bearings on everything that just happened, and I don't think they fully, I know they didn't get to fully grieve after that happened. They just built it up. And that that build up of all the things that happened throughout the years, it led to Saint Anger. And I really do love this album so much, but I think out of all their albums that came out in the 80s, it was probably the worst one. Not just because of the bass, some of the songs are awkwardly put together. The drums just sound like they're chugging along, but I still do love this album, and I think after what Metallica was going through at the time, this was still a good album that came out. Still a classic for metal fans, and I do love this album. I've gained a lot more respect for it than I used to have. Whenever I did my Metallica collection video, I honestly didn't really like it that much, but I've found some new respect for it. Next album is one of my favorite albums of all time. A thrash classic, Kill 'Em All. Kill 'Em All was when they were at their most thrashy. It's really Motorhead sounding. It's just, you can tell where they got their inspirations from. There's a lot of classics on here. Hit the Lights, Four Horsemen, Motor Breath, Jump in the Fire, Anesthesia, Whiplash, Phantom Lord, No Remorse, Seek and Destroy, Metal Militia. Each of those songs is killer. Headbanging goodness yet again. It's their debut album, and a lot of bands would kill to have an album as great as this, let alone their first album. So I think for the beginning, it was great. I know there's a lot of history behind it. Ron McGovney, Dave Mustaine getting kicked out, replaced by Kirk Hammett, Cliff Burton, but everybody's just given 1,000,000% on this album, and you can really feel it. However, it's not their best album, but I still love it to pieces. Listen to it all the time. Cannot get enough of it. Highly recommend it. I cannot talk today, guys. But the next album, we're getting in the top 3 now. Next album is the Black Album. This is my first Metallica album, and people say it's overrated, too mainstream, but really when you sit back and look at it, it's a monster album. It is killer. Enter Sandman, Sad But True, Holier Than Thou, The Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam, Don't Tread on Me, Through the Never, Nothing Else Matters, Of Wolf and Man, The God That Failed, My Friend Misery, which I'm trying to learn on bass. How you guys know that? The Struggle Within. I love this album. And this is when Metallica had attained legend status. In the 90s, their giant Black Album tour, they went to Moscow, Russia, and had the biggest concert of all time. 500,000 people. That's insane. When do you see any other band doing that? You don't, because Metallica was the only one. They had the biggest concert of all time. Black Album is the one that did that. It elevated them to status beyond legends. They ascended past the big four. They were more than just metal. They were more than just a band. They were legends on their own. Or at least that's what they thought, and their ego got huge, and it led to some fallouts and personal history and just a lot of bad stuff that happened to him throughout that time. But this album is truly amazing. Bob Rock he's the producer, and he really knew how to make the sound really crisp and clear. Like, you can just hear everything. Like, this album's just so good. People say it's overrated, but it deserves it. And a lot of the songs on here are really deep for Metallica. Like, these songs get super deep. Like, The Unforgiven, The God That Failed, those are both about James's mom and him feeling the guilt for not being able to do anything about it. About her dying. Like, that's insanely deep and tragic. So yeah, Black Album, It deserves the love. Come on, guys. Alright, we're in the top 2. You know the next ones, but you may be surprised for which one's a number 1 and which one's a number 2. Usually, people would have Master of Puppets in number 1, but I'm going to have to put it in number 2, guys. I love it. I think these albums are pretty much equal. Every single song on these albums are like pretty much perfect. Master of Puppets is where they perfected their art, and it's really where they reached their peak. Black Album was when they reached their, their highest status and just became known for the legends they are, but Master of Puppets is where they truly mastered their skill. Cliff Burton is giving a million. You could feel the whole band giving 1,010% on this thing, especially on the songs they all wrote together, like Master of Puppets. Like, there's some metal classics on here that you cannot deny left a mark on the world. Album cover's cool. It's got some really deep themes about war and violence and all that good stuff. You cannot overstate how good this album got, and just what it did for the band at that time. But yeah, that album was insanely amazing. Everyone gave 1,000%, or 1,010%. And you could really just feel it in the performance. Unfortunately, Cliff Burton died after that album, so that was his last piece of work that he ever got to do. But he really left his mark on the world. And Orion is one of my favorite songs of all time. It's just so much goodness locked into one. And lastly, my number 1 spot, my favorite album, not only of Metallica's, but dare I say, my favorite album of all time would have to be Ride the Lightning. First of all, the cover's amazing. But every single song on here is just, every single one is like perfect. Fight Fire with Fire, Ride the Lightning, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Fade to Black, which is my favorite song, Trapped Under Ice, Escape, Creeping Death, The Call of Cthulhu. Cliff Burton wrote 6 out of the 8 songs on this album. And we all know what a musical genius he was, so that just goes to show. But you can feel every single member of the band going full at it. Beyond 1,010%, beyond 2,010%. Like, they gave absolutely everything and more. And this is where they went from small little club players to giant arena and stadium players. This is where they honed their craft. And although I do agree that Master of Puppets, they tweaked things and made it slightly better, I prefer this album. It's just personal preference, but these songs, every single one of them just speaks to me. Has great beats, it's catchy, really gets you headbanging, and it's just everything I'd ever want in an album. And it's my number 1 favorite album of all time. Peak Metallica, in my opinion. But anyways, what do you guys think? What are your favorite albums in your order? What do you think? I would really like to know, because I want to hear everybody else's different opinions. Anyway, with that being said, those are my favorite Metallica albums from least to favorite. That being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.